violence. Yet this ship invokes the strongest of human reactions, a reverence unknown to the casual observer.
The silhouette is so majestic and the ship is so ominous in its beauty that there's an emotionalism to it.
It's just almost $1 for a man to love a piece of metal like I love this ship.
The Battleship Wisconsin, the last of her breed, a relic of World War II. Yet some 40 years later, her crew is quick to distinguish themselves from other, more contemporary vessels.
They never say, I'm off the USS Wisconsin. You'll always hear our sailors say, well, I'm off the Battleship Wisconsin.
She is both beautiful and the last of her kind. She remains the embodiment of American sea power. Those are the words of author, historian, and director of the Wisconsin Veterans Museum, Richard Zeitlin.
And the ship is really a remarkable piece of maritime engineering. It is really a spectacular piece of equipment. I think I liken it in my book to a Ferrari sports car only 18 stories tall. It's quite a piece of equipment.
There are many things you can say about this battleship. Fast, sleek, powerful. All are accurate, but all fail to capture the one element, perhaps more than any other, which defines Battleship Wisconsin, her 16-inch guns. From the end of World War II to Korea and the Gulf War, these guns are the world's largest.
The 16-inch gun is a rifle-like weapon. Each barrel weighs 240,000 pounds. But we're talking about a rifle nonetheless. It fires a bullet, which is called a projectile. It takes 600 pounds of powder to propel that bullet, and it can go up to 24 miles with a very high degree of accuracy.
Best way I can explain it,
Wisconsin bosun Tom Marshall.
is lighting a stick of dynamite and just setting it down in front of you and letting it go off. Feels like somebody hits you in the chest with a sledgehammer. There's nothing that can explain the concussion that will actually peel your face back. It's just awesome. It's awesome. And the fireball that comes out, there's nothing that will ever compare with it. Nothing.
Sunday, December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. The ships of the fleet, mostly battleships, are either on fire, badly crippled, or sunk. It was once thought great armadas of battleships fighting battleships would ultimately decide the fate of worlds and empires, an offensive force capable of winning decisive sea battles. This was the war plan held sacred by the Navy for nearly 50 years. The Japanese sank those grandiose war plans in a few hours.
It was the airplane that actually eclipsed battleships, and right following Pearl Harbor, everybody recognized that right away. And instead of battleships being so critical in the minds of naval planners, which they had been very much so up until that point, aircraft carriers became realized as the important and consequential vessels to carry out naval warfare.
So, with an uncertain future and ambivalent mission, the Navy struggles with what to do with their battleships. At the time of Pearl Harbor, 4 superships are in various stages of completion. Collectively, the 4 are referred to as the Iowa-class battleships. They are the Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin.
And the Iowas were the last class of battleships manufactured by the United States, and they have this kind of, well, the uniqueness of being the last. The USS Wisconsin was the last battleship produced.
Exactly 2 years after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the Navy launches Battleship Wisconsin.
Well, the launching was at Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Naval Yard, and the governor of Wisconsin's wife, Madge Goodland, the governor's wife, was there to dedicate the ship. It was a glorious moment for the state of Wisconsin.
A glorious moment for a glorious ship. nearly 3 football fields long, 108 feet wide, a crew of 2,700 men. But glory turns to reality as the Wisconsin joins the South Pacific Fleet for the last chapter of World War II.
How much I do recall the idea of coming topside when we finally joined the fleet out at sea. And from horizon to horizon, I saw nothing but American ships.
At the age of 22, Ted Blahnik is already a veteran of war. He survives the bombing of Pearl Harbor. He survives the sinking of the Helena at Guadalcanal. And he feels he will survive on board the USS Wisconsin.
Because, you know, here I'm on this big battleship. I got 18 inches of armor plate. I don't have to really worry about too many torpedoes sinking this thing. So it was more of a feeling of, I had a hell of a lot more security.
The battleship is a very sturdy piece of equipment. There's just no way around it. It is a very strongly built, robust, solid, easily defended, high protection, very secure piece of equipment, very secure place to be.
World War II provides a mission for Wisconsin, a focus born from a desperate act from a desperate enemy who brings to war an almost unthinkable new weapon, the kamikaze.
You know, the kamikaze, you might look at that as the cruise missile of the 1940s. It did have a person in it. It was not a guided missile, but nonetheless, that was the same idea, same size. A small airplane loaded with a bomb on a one-way mission, you know, just trying to crash into it. Very much like what a cruise missile like an Exocet is today.
Ted Blahnik is on one of the several 40-millimeter gun mounts the Wisconsin carries, guns specifically designed to shoot down airplanes.
You put that plane in your sights, you pull the trigger, and you hope that you're going to hit the darn thing. The Japanese were going after carriers and they were going after destroyers. And consequently, they didn't go up the battleships very much. Battleships were there mainly to protect the carriers.
While the war continues, a second mission emerges. While originally designed to sink other battleships, the large 16-inch guns protect the Army and Marines landing on Pacific beaches.
If I remember correctly, it was Easter morning that we were bombarding Okinawa and helping the troops to come ashore. Later on in the war, we did go up and we bombarded the island of Hokkaido and a steel mill, as I recall, at Hokodate.
In the waning days of the war, Blahnik is transferred off his gun mount to a job below deck. Inside his compartment, he finds a record player.
And I always remember, and you probably don't remember it or never even heard of it, but it was a song called The Hills of Home, sung by Richard Crooks. Beautiful. And so all during the time they were bombarding and things like that, I was sitting down there listening to the record player. Let's face it, we were hopefully getting near the end of the war. And then it seemed strange that hear this record, The Hills of Home. And of course, what did I think of? The Hills of Home.
Finally, the official announcement from President Harry Truman.
I deem this reply a full acceptance of the Potsdam Declaration, which specifies the unconditional surrender of Japan.
The country erupts in jubilation. The long ordeal is over. The news of peace is echoed around the world.
Within a half hour, I went down to my compartment and I cried. Now, you want to call that happy? You betcha, I was happy.
On her sister ship, the Battleship Missouri, General Douglas MacArthur accepts the unconditional surrender of Japan on behalf of the Allied forces. For her part in the war, the Wisconsin, who fought in such major conflicts as Iwo Jima, Okinawa, and the bombardment of Japan, receives 5 battle stars. In the 9 months she fought, the Wisconsin was never hit, and her crew never suffered any casualties.
I would love to be able to say that the Wisconsin won the war, but we didn't. We were part of a big picture of those that did win the war.
After the war, Battleship Wisconsin is taken out of service, decommissioned in Navy lingo, and put into storage. But peace is fragile, and within a few short years, the world turns its attention to the Korean Peninsula.
Along comes the Korean War in 1950, and the battleships are one by one taken out of mothballs and sent to participate in the Korean War.
It is 1950. North Korean Communist forces, with Soviet and Chinese support, surge into South Korea. What is at first called a police action quickly degenerates into war.
And it was felt that the battleships, Wisconsin and the other battleships, would be able to interdict enemy supplies heading down the Korean railroad network, as well as interrupt the flow of supplies going along the roads, which are also quite near the coast, and that the battleships, Wisconsin and the others, could provide gunfire support for the troops on shore.
It was, I had never quite seen anything like it. It was massive. I couldn't believe that I was going to be on this ship.
17-year-old Joel Adler joins the Navy. Influenced by John Wayne movies, he thinks life on a battleship will be, in his words, a vacation.
And then we sailed across the Pacific and got to sleep on the teak wood decks and look up at the starlit night, and it was dreams of glory until we got to Korea, which was very extremely cold. It was bone-chilling. There were no bands, no John Wayne anywhere to be seen, and some of them were shooting at us.
Adler's job is to shoot back. The combination of noise, cold, and nearly constant battle makes life on the Wisconsin miserable.
Everybody was in extreme fatigue to the point where you were afraid to, you never touched anybody to wake them up to relieve you. And you had to wake them up very carefully because they'd usually wake up and punch anybody that was near them. It was an extremely difficult situation.
Yet, this is war, and the Wisconsin is involved in combat almost daily. March 15th, 1952. Wisconsin is close to the Korean shore.
We went in apparently too far, and they had 3 close misses, and the 4th round hit us, and we had some casualties. Not fatal.
One of the 3 casualties is Joel Adler.
I had said we're going to take a hit, and I tried to release the belt that I was strapped with and couldn't. And at that point, it hit below me, about 50 feet down on the deck where the gun mounts were, and spritzed shrapnel pieces all over. The gun captain himself, from my knowledge, it landed between his feet, and he was completely peppered with this, and I had gotten it in the eye.
Adler's injuries turn out to be minor, and he returns to duty quickly.
This is now the second war that the battleship was in, and this is the first casualties they had ever taken, and the damage was quite minimal. There's a picture, you can see the hole in the deck, but the shell, of course, could not penetrate any of the armored decks below.
The war ends with no clear victor. This time, there is no ceremony on the deck of a battleship.
The results of the support mission of Wisconsin and the other battleships in Korea was an inconclusive one. It certainly hurt the North Koreans. It certainly interrupted the flow of supplies. It certainly made the flow of supplies more difficult for the enemy, but it could not stop the flow of supplies.
And it was just, you felt frustrated. You felt like, what was it all for? You know, all these guys died. So I basically, I think you grow up, and all the things that you learned and took for granted, now you understood what the world is like and how harsh and uncaring everything is.
After the Korean War, Battleship Wisconsin remains in service and tours world ports on goodwill missions. She also trains a new generation of sailors and officers. Yet what a hostile enemy couldn't do in 2 wars is nearly accomplished by a ship from her own Navy in an event witnessed by Jim Wyrick.
Well, we were steaming at sea 64 miles off of Norfolk, Virginia, and we were approaching a heavy fog bank. And upon entering that, why, I was sitting up turret 2 drinking coffee and chatting with the other gunner's mates, and all of a sudden we felt a big jolt, just like he took a big chunk and peeled it around to the starboard side. And destroyer Eden, why, we went almost completely through it.
The destroyer Eaton is nearly sunk. Badly damaged, the Wisconsin limps back to port. Immediately, the Navy starts to repair the Wisconsin using parts from the unfinished battleship Kentucky.
The front end of that ship was removed from the battleship Kentucky, which was never going to be finished, and placed, riveted and put onto the battleship Wisconsin, which makes the battleship Wisconsin, I think, 11 inches longer than the other Iowa-class battleships. So not only is the Wisconsin the last battleship, it's the biggest battleship.
But such distinction could not save the Wisconsin or her sisters. This was peacetime, and by 1958, all 4 ships were decommissioned and put into mothballs, leaving the Navy without a battleship for the first time since 1895.
They figured it would be the end. And so that was sort of deep storage, you might say, just closed down, buttoned up tight, not really a particularly good job of storing it either. I think that it was felt that they would be scrapped. It was felt that they would never be called into service again.
The battleship Wisconsin lays at the Philadelphia Navy Yard, comatose, if not dead. Grass grows between the seams of her once beautiful teak deck. Her bell never rings, only rusts. The decades roll by, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and Wisconsin is oblivious to a changing political climate.
In the late Carter years, it was felt that the United States had allowed its military forces to slip below what was prudent, particularly in the Navy, where the number of ships had gone down to just remarkably few.
But it was not until the Reagan years and a new commitment to the military that the Navy started to think the unthinkable. Bring back the battleships. Bring back Wisconsin.
This ship was paid for by taxpayers of some decades ago, and it indeed is like the car that is owned by the little old lady who only uses it on Sunday to go to church. It may be of an older model, but it is very low mileage.
Wisconsin was commissioned in '44. It only served 1 year in World War II. Then it was not long after World War II, it was decommissioned, brought back for 2 years during the Korean War, and then a year after the Korean War, it was decommissioned again. It had had a very short life. There was a lot of useful service left on the hull and machinery.
Many think bringing the Wisconsin back is folly. Too expensive a move for what is called a World War II museum piece. Yet the decision is made. After decades in mothballs, Wisconsin is towed to a shipyard in Mississippi. Work begins to transform her into a contemporary naval war machine, complete with an array of modern weapons. The price tag is $385 million.
Modern electrics, upgrading the engines with modern fuels, less pollution, better living conditions, air conditioning, Tomahawk missiles, enormous shipbuilding project.
October 22nd, 1988. The last battleship returns to the fleet.
I hereby place United States ship Wisconsin in commission. God bless and Godspeed to all who sail in her.
A giant ship is awakened after 30 years of sleep.
Captain, the watch is set. The ship is manned. The crew is at quarters. Request to bring the ship to life. Bring the ship to life. Aye, aye, Captain. Ship's company, bring the ship to life.
Critics complain the Wisconsin's recommissioning is a waste of money and question the usefulness and modern-day mission of a World War II-era vessel. But the world political landscape changes abruptly. August 1990. Iraq invades Kuwait, and the battleship is called to arms, dispatched to the Mideast. Ship's bosun, Tom Marshall.
From Norfolk to the Straits of Gibraltar, we made it in 4 days and 16 hours. And it was the first time in my life I ever got jet lag on a ship.
January 1991. Diplomatic efforts fail. Battleship Wisconsin coordinates the first strike of the war and launches Tomahawk cruise missiles into Baghdad.
Recommend execute plan 10, Captain. Execute 10. Execute plan. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Launch.
In Baghdad, the world watches as CNN correspondent Bernard Shaw reports the first moments of the war.
The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated. We're seeing bright flashes going off all over the sky. This is extraordinary.
You're first watching launch like, wow, that's...
Rick Steckel is a member of the Wisconsin crew.
Like, wow, that's really neat. You know, you're seeing this thing fly, and then you start thinking this thing is actually going somewhere to destroy something. Then different thoughts race through your mind. You're thinking, I can't believe this missile is actually going to go and blow up some building 400 or 500 miles away. Just the thought of it flying to actually go destroy something kind of makes you sick.
The Iraqis had never seen what a battleship could do. And when Desert Storm started and we shot all our missiles, then we eased on up north and started popping loose with our 16-inch guns. And within 4 or 5 days, after shooting 16-inch rounds day and night, the next thing you know, the enemy just disappeared. They went 23 miles inland just to get away from this big thing.
Shades of the old battleship. 54-year-old shells, which were designed to fight Hirohito, are now bombing the troops of Saddam Hussein.
Look right here, date of manufacture, 1937 is when the projectile was manufactured.
Shades of the new battleship. An unmanned remote-controlled model airplane is equipped with a camera. The gunners can now actually see their targets over the horizon.
It would be similar to people who are watching the war here at home. You're watching us shoot at something, and you know it's you shooting because you feel the presence, the gun shoot, the whole ship shakes. Then you wait 40, 50 seconds on a monitor, you see your shells landing in on this area you're shooting at. But it's like watching, kind of like watching a TV show.
We were the only ship in the world that had the enemy surrender to that plane. When the plane would come over, the enemy knew that there was 16-inch rounds right behind it because we were using it for spotting. It's got an infrared camera on it. And we actually have it on tape, the Iraqis waving a white flag at that plane so we wouldn't shoot at it. The Iraqis were scared to death of this ship.
It played a major role in the events of the Desert Storm conflict. And for all the criticisms that people heap on the battleships, the fact is it did work.
With the business of war taken care of, the Wisconsin heads home.
America is waiting to give you a homecoming, the strongest one I think we'll ever witness since VE Day, VJ Day, 1945.
Nearly 10,000 people welcome the Wisconsin home to Norfolk, Virginia. Mostly parents, wives, and children, those who have not seen their sailors for 233 days. Yet, amid the celebration, rumors circulate that the Congress is considering yet another decommissioning. Many dismiss it, especially following such a successful performance in the Gulf War. Yet by mid-1991, it becomes official. The Wisconsin is scheduled for decommissioning yet again. With the end in sight, the Wisconsin invites former crew members, those from World War II and Korea, to join those from Desert Storm for an Atlantic Ocean farewell cruise.
37 years since I've been on this vessel. Thank you.
And for many of the older veterans, this is an opportunity to revisit what was perhaps the most significant time of their lives.
I almost fell down and kissed the deck because I was happy to be back.
War on a battleship, the common rite of passage that these men took through life.
Well, I choked up, but this ship was good to me.
It was good to me, too.
I came on here, a youth, a boy, and left a man.
Oh, yeah.
Yet at a reported $1 million a day operating cost, the Congress tells the Navy the battleship has got to go.
I'm a sentimental old fool. I mean, you get attached to a ship. You fall in love with it, you know. I mean, you go home on leave for 2 weeks, and when you come back, you kiss the deck because you're so glad to be back aboard your ship. So what I did, I chose to retire early. I'm retiring on the 9th of August, just so I won't have to watch her go out of commission. It would break my heart. It's like seeing your best friend die. It would break. I could not stand it. I don't even know if I can come to the decommissioning ceremony. I don't even know if I can do it. Getting a little weary-eyed here now. All right, bud.
March off the crew.
September 30th, 1991. After only 3 years since her rebirth, including the Gulf War, Battleship Wisconsin is decommissioned, sentenced to a mothballed existence of undetermined length. Many speculate that a ship built for World War II, no matter how modernized, no matter how successful in war, will never again find a niche in the modern Navy. And so her sailors march off her decks, perhaps forever, marking the end of an era in naval history.